Have you ever been at like a really fun dinner party, laughing and talking, but suddenly you just find yourself secretly counting down the minutes until you can go home and be completely alone?
Oh, that hidden countdown clock. It's so incredibly common.
Right. I mean, you aren't even necessarily having a bad time. You might genuinely love the people around the table. The food is great. The conversation is interesting. But internally, there is this quiet, undeniable alarm bell ringing, basically telling you that you have absolutely reached your limit.
Yeah, it's a highly specific, almost confusing feeling, isn't it? Because, you're engaged, you're smiling, but there's just this ticking clock in your head.
Exactly. And the instinct usually is to judge ourselves for that clock. We think, well, what is wrong with me? Why am I not enjoying this as much as everyone else seems to be?
We completely moralize our fatigue.
We do. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring the psychology of social battery management and the very real, biologically grounded reality of social fatigue.
Which is such an important topic.
It really is. Our mission for this deep dive is to validate that deeply relatable need for alone time and to extract some practical, guilt-free strategies for protecting your peace. And to guide us, we are analyzing a couple of really great excerpts from Skillify English.
Ah, yes. The series hosted by John and Neha.
Right, specifically their episodes titled Reclaiming Your Social Energy and the Social Battery.
And what's fascinating here is that this material was actually designed for B1 English learners. It's meant to be this warm, pressure-free listening practice.
But in doing that, it strips away so much of the complex societal guilt we carry. It just breaks down the core biological truth that needing to recharge is not a personality flaw.
No, it really isn't. We treat it as a failure of character, a sign that we are cold or antisocial, rather than, an objective biological reality. Because when you interact with other people, your brain is executing an astonishing amount of invisible work. It is never just about the words being spoken.
Okay, let's unpack this invisible work. Because we often use these tired metaphors like, having 20 browser tabs open in your brain at once to describe it.
Yeah, which doesn't really capture the active effort involved.
Exactly. But the Skillify material specifically looks at this through the lens of language learners, which offers a much better analogy. For an English learner, socializing isn't just listening, it's like being a live UN translator.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the cognitive load of a UN translator. You aren't just passively receiving sound.
Right, you're doing so much more.
You are actively decoding the literal vocabulary, analyzing the tone of voice, translating micro-expressions.
Drafting a response.
Yes, drafting a response and checking it for cultural context before you even open your mouth to speak.
It's what the source brilliantly calls notification overload for your spirit. And the thing is, even if you are speaking your native language, you're still doing a version of that UN translation.
Oh, absolutely.
You're playing these subtle roles like the helpful colleague, the funny friend, the perfect partner. You are constantly modulating your reactions to fit the environment and managing the expectations of the room.
Which is exhausting.
Right. The fatigue isn't coming from the physical act of talking. It's coming from that invisible, high-speed neurological processing.
Precisely. And the brain only has so much metabolic energy to dedicate to that level of processing. When it reaches capacity, it has to triage resources.
It has to prioritize.
Exactly. Which leads directly to a concept we need to define from the Skillify host's word tour.
Yeah.
It's the tendency to zone out.
Yes, zoning out, to gradually lose focus and mentally disconnect from your surroundings. But I have to push back on the way this is usually framed.
Oh, how so?
Well, we often hear that zoning out is this highly evolved protective mechanism, but wait, if it's protective, why does it feel so terrible?
That's a fair point.
In the moment, zoning out doesn't feel like I'm being protected. It feels like my brain is just malfunctioning. I feel embarrassed when someone asks me a question and I realize I've been staring blankly at a wall for 2 minutes. If this is an evolved trait, why is it so clumsy?
Well, it feels clumsy because your conscious mind wants to stay engaged, but your autonomic nervous system is basically pulling the emergency brake.
So it's like a hard stop.
Yeah, it's a brute force protection. When the brain becomes too full of noise, when that UN translator is completely overwhelmed by inputs and there isn't enough processing power left to decode the room, the brain forces a shutdown of attention.
Wow.
It essentially unplugs the sensory input to keep your core neurological hardware from overheating. So yes, it feels socially awkward, but biologically your brain is saying, look, if we don't drop these external inputs right now, we are going to crash.
Which raises this really interesting contradiction. Because if my physical phone hits 1% battery and shuts down a heavy app to save power, I don't apologize to the phone. I don't feel ashamed of the phone, I just plug it in. Yet, when our brains do the exact same thing, social fatigue is loaded with immense guilt.
And that guilt stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of how different human nervous systems actually operate.
How so?
Well, we live in a society that highly values constant availability and, outward enthusiasm. So when our biological processing hits its limit, we label it as antisocial rather than just tired.
We think we're being rude.
Exactly. We fear that if we step away, we'll be perceived as uninvested in the relationship. So we fight the biology.
We ignore the 1% warning and just power through. I know I have definitely done this. I've powered through social obligations on absolute empty, keeping this fake smile plastered on my face, and paid for it dearly the next day with a massive social hangover.
And powering through is what leads straight to complete burnout.
Yeah.
To break that cycle of guilt, we have to look at the genuine neurological differences in how people are wired.
Like introverts and extroverts.
Exactly. It isn't just about who is shy and who is outgoing, which is a very common misconception.
Right. Let's dig into that mechanism. Because we always hear that extroverts gain energy from people and introverts lose energy. But what does that actually mean under the hood? How does the exact same dinner party leave one person buzzing with aliveness and another person quietly running on fumes?
It really comes down to baseline levels of cortical arousal. Essentially, how stimulated your brain is in its default state.
Okay.
Introverts typically have a naturally high baseline of arousal. Their brains are already highly active, constantly processing internal thoughts and environmental details.
So they're already running hot.
Right. Because their baseline is already high, they don't need much external stimulation to feel alert. So when you drop an introvert into a highly stimulating environment, like a noisy dinner party, that extra input pushes them over the edge into overstimulation. It just becomes exhausting to manage.
So their internal human translator is basically getting deafened by the noise because the volume was already turned all the way up inside the booth.
That's a great way to put it. Extroverts, on the other hand, typically have a lower baseline of arousal. In a quiet, solitary room, they might feel understimulated, maybe even sluggish or bored.
Interesting.
They require external input like conversation, activity, novelty to trigger the dopamine reward pathways in their brains and bring their arousal up to an optimal level.
Oh, wow. So for them, the dinner party is the fuel that makes their engine run smoothly. But for the introvert, the dinner party is the excess heat that makes the engine overheat.
Exactly.
That reframes the entire conversation. Needing alone time isn't a sign of being difficult or broken or socially inept. It is a biological requirement for your specific baseline. You wouldn't feel guilty for being hungry because food is a biological need.
Exactly. And the Skillify material makes the warm science-backed case that rest is exactly the same. It is a basic need.
Not a reward you earn.
Right. You don't have to socialize until you literally collapse just to earn the right to go home.
That paradigm shift is so crucial. Once you accept that your cognitive energy is a physical reality governed by your nervous system, you can start looking for your dashboard warning lights.
Yes, you can recognize the signs that you're running on empty before you hit that brute force shutdown where you start zoning out.
And we all have those specific tells, you know? You feel that sense of being frazzled. You notice you stop genuinely laughing at jokes, or your responses get really short, or your head just gets kind of foggy.
Definitely.
I know for me, my biggest warning sign is that I start holding my breath without realizing it, and the ambient noise of the room suddenly sounds like twice as loud.
Well, that auditory sensitivity is a classic sign of cognitive overload. Your brain is literally losing its ability to filter out irrelevant background noise.
That makes so much sense.
And when you notice those signs, the question becomes, how do we act on them? If rest is a biological need, how do we actually secure it without offending the people we care about?
Right. This is where we need a mechanism to stop the drain. And we can look at how the Skillify hosts structure their vocabulary lessons to build this toolkit. They center this around the widely understood metaphor of the social battery.
Which is an informal term, but a highly accurate one.
It really is. It represents the finite amount of social energy a person has available before interaction becomes draining rather than enjoyable.
And acknowledging the social battery is the first step in setting boundaries. A battery has a maximum capacity. It will eventually deplete during use, and it must be recharged.
You can't argue with a battery.
Exactly. When you view your energy as a literal finite resource, it removes the expectation of endless availability.
Which brings us to the hardest part, I think. The graceful exit. Leaving a social situation kindly, honestly, and without excessive guilt.
It can be tough.
I will admit, I am terrible at this. When I want to leave a gathering, my instinct is to invent this massive, complex story about why I have to go. I've literally told people I had to get up early to let a contractor into my house when I rent my apartment, and absolutely nothing is broken.
Oh, no.
It is. It's a total panic response because I don't want them to feel rejected.
Well, that urge to over-explain is incredibly common. We construct these elaborate fictions because we want to protect the other person's ego.
Right. We think if I have a dramatic, unavoidable emergency, they won't think I'm leaving because of them.
Exactly. But practically speaking, over-explaining usually creates way more stress.
Because they ask questions.
Right. The host might offer to help with your fake emergency or ask follow-up questions, and suddenly you're expending even more cognitive energy trying to maintain a lie.
It's exhausting. But setting boundaries doesn't require a 5-page essay of excuses. A clean boundary is just short, kind honesty. And this is the beauty of the graceful exit.
What's the best way to do it?
You just say something like, I've had a wonderful time, but I think I'm going to call it a night. Or, I need to step away for a bit to recharge. That is it. No contractors required.
Let's break down why those phrases are so effective psychologically. I've had a wonderful time, but I'm going to call it a night. First, you are affirming the connection and the host's efforts. You are clearly stating that the event was enjoyable.
Validating them first.
Yes. And second, you're taking ownership of the exit. You aren't blaming the event, and you aren't offering a fake excuse that invites negotiation. You are simply stating a fact about your own capacity.
That's brilliant.
It's elegant because it's fundamentally respectful, both to the host and to your own nervous system.
It is incredibly liberating when you finally give yourself that official permission slip to just go home early without shame. I remember the first time I used a clean exit at a party. I walked out to my car, shut the door, and the immediate, overwhelming rush of relief I felt was staggering.
The silence is amazing.
The silence in the car felt like a physical weight lifting off my chest. Which actually leads perfectly into the final vocabulary concept we need to explore today, solitude.
Ah, yes. Solitude is what happens after the graceful exit. And it's vital that we distinguish solitude from loneliness because they are completely different emotional landscapes.
Exactly. I think people get these mixed up all the time, assuming that if you want to be alone, you must be lonely. But how do those two states actually differ in terms of our psychology?
It really comes down to agency and deprivation. Loneliness is involuntary. It is a painful, unwanted feeling of being disconnected or isolated when you actually desire connection.
So you want to be with people, but you can't.
Right. It's a state of psychological deprivation, and it is highly stressful for the human brain. Solitude, on the other hand, is the chosen peaceful state of being alone.
It's intentional.
It is intentional and restorative. When you choose solitude, you are actively removing the external inputs that have been draining your battery.
Solitude is basically the act of plugging the phone back into the wall. But practically speaking, how do we find that solitude in a busy life? Because, not everyone can excuse themselves from a dinner party and retreat to a silent cabin in the woods for a 3-day weekend. Many of us have families or roommates or demanding jobs.
Well, you don't need a 3-day silent retreat to recharge. You can reclaim your peace in tiny, intentional increments, which we can think of as micro-wins.
Micro-wins, I love that.
Yeah, these are brief moments where you completely control your sensory environment.
Let's look at some real-world scenarios for these micro-wins from the sources. One of the most effective strategies is taking a 10-minute walk with absolutely no headphones. No music, no podcasts, no phone calls, just quiet. Why is the no headphones part so critical there?
Because music and podcasts are still external inputs. Your brain is still processing that narrative, decoding the audio, and experiencing emotional reaction to the content.
Even if it's a fun podcast.
Even then, it's still a drain on cognitive resources. True rest requires zero external narrative. When you walk without headphones, you are allowing your mind to switch from active processing to the default mode network.
What's that?
It's the resting state of the brain, where it consolidates memories, processes emotions, and physically recovers from fatigue.
So, reading one single page of a physical book, or just sitting quietly by a window with a cup of coffee for 5 minutes without looking at a screen, these aren't just quaint little self-care tips. They are deliberate acts of sensory deprivation.
Precisely. In those moments, you are reclaiming agency. You're choosing the lack of stimulation. You are being the captain of your own ship.
I really like that.
Instead of letting the demands, texts, and expectations of everyone else dictate where your attention goes, you are intentionally steering yourself into calm waters to drop the anchor.
Dropping the anchor, that's a beautiful way to frame it. And the great irony of all this, and the most empowering takeaway, really, is that by fiercely protecting your social battery and taking that solitude, you actually become much better at socializing.
That is the ultimate truth of social battery management. When you stop powering through on 1%, you stop being irritable. You stop zoning out mid-conversation.
Right, you're actually there.
Yes. When you actually take the time to recharge, you return to your relationships with genuine energy. You can be fully present. The most generous thing you can bring to any social situation is a battery that is actually charged.
So what does this all mean? Well, as you go through your week, just remember that your energy is precious. You are under no obligation to be available to everyone 24 hours a day.
Absolutely.
You are allowed to close the UN translator booth. You are allowed to say, I've had a wonderful time, but I'm going to call it a night. Knowing your own limits is not a weakness. It is a profound sign of self-knowledge. Giving yourself the solitude you genuinely need is never something that requires an apology.
And before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, I'm ready.
We've used the concept of a battery today as a metaphor for social energy, but think about the actual lithium-ion batteries powering the devices around you.
Like in our phones.
Right. If you constantly drain a lithium-ion battery all the way down to 0% before recharging it, you don't just temporarily lose power, you physically degrade the battery. It actually loses its overall maximum lifespan.
Oh, wow. I see where you were going with this.
Yeah. If human social capacity functions in a similar way, if pushing ourselves to absolute exhaustion causes friction and resentment, could forcing ourselves to stay at social events out of guilt actually be permanently damaging our long-term capacity to form deep, trusting connections? Are we sacrificing the lifespan of our relationships just to be polite in the moment?
That is a brilliant and honestly slightly terrifying question to leave off on. If we keep draining ourselves to zero just to avoid being perceived as rude, we might be slowly eroding our ability to connect at all. We really have to prioritize the recharge.
We really do.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope you feel validated, a little more understood, and armed with the science to protect your peace without all that guilt. Take a gentle, quiet moment for yourself today. You haven't just earned it, you biologically require it. See you next time.